The alarm went off. Liam Clarkson flailed out a hand without thinking about it, shut it off, then managed to open one gummy eye. The room was pitch black. Dawn wasn't even an idea yet. He lay in bed for a lingering moment, feeling the sheets beneath his fingertips, drawing in the warmth of the heavy duvet that covered the Empress-sized bed. He was a guest, after all, at least in theory. That meant being put up in one of the good guest rooms, with a bed that could sleep four comfortably. 4 Shulvanti. It was a big bed. Words like vast came to mind. Back home, the Great White North was white again, and there were still empty swaths of snowy tundra that only grizzly bears and Rakiri could love. Huge empty wilderness bereft of other human beings for hundreds of miles. It was that kind of bed. The kind of bed where you'd need Marlin Perkins, 6 Sherpa guides, and one of those dogs to find your way out. The dogs that had the can of alcohol stuck in a collar around their neck. The ones you saw in the old cartoons bounding through the snow to dig someone out of a snowbank. What were they? It was 3 a.m. Liam forgave himself for not being able to remember. Burmese mountain dogs? No. Right kind of dog, but no. He stretched once, feeling the sheets, then rolled out of bed into something like sitting up and stretched again. Of course, he'd gone to bed early. Really early. He'd known this was coming last night when he turned in at, 8, maybe? It had been a long day and he was exhausted, but it didn't matter. The Rakiri looked exhausted too. The Shulvanti all looked shattered, but they kept at it. With the herd of Turoks being moved into the upper pasture, it meant even longer stretches to drive. That meant getting up earlier, food prep, kitchen cleanup, and hauling it out to the fields through the vast swaths of grass and buttes that was Wilist. There was supposed to be a resort near one of the big towns by one of the seas. There weren't any oceans, unless you counted the oceans of grass, filled by critters and plants that Turoks like to eat, and the green shore that preyed on the Turoks, keeping the herds healthy. Life on Wilist had just reached the stage where plants were a good idea and had a breathable atmosphere when the Shulvanti settled it. Centuries later, that's what you got. Oceans of grass covered by seas of Turoks and... Liam shook his head, got up, found his pants, and pulled them on. He slipped his shirt on, then fumbled around, and found his flannel shirt and tucked that on too. He had brought it because it was good for slashing around at night, and it was comfortable. Willis wasn't cold, but out in the vast savannah, another layer helped keep off the dust, so it was better to have than not have. He'd been having a good dream. He was sure of it. He couldn't remember it, but he seldom remembered dreams. Right now, I'm doing damn well just standing up. St. Bernard's. That was it. He congratulated himself on long-term memory starting to be a thing again, as he pulled on his boots. The ranch wouldn't rest until all the Turoks were in the upper pasture. That meant longer days, early nights, and no Belder, since she was off with the rest of the women. Some vacation. It would have been alright if the Sasanas were a bit friendlier. Sure, there was Kurlek. The Rakiri was nice. Chatty, even. But it just seemed like most of the Shulvanti didn't know what to make of him. He was a human, on a world that had barely heard of humans. Except for, well, things. Stamina. Sex. That wasn't to say the women weren't friendly, just sort of working up to the idea. It just wasn't the right kind of friendly. Belle's cousins and sisters, the ones who were back in at the ranch, were already friendly. Belle's youngest cousin, Gendry, was really friendly, but at least so far it had been reserved to long looks that he was trying to ignore. Everyone on the ranch was dead tired. The women who'd already come in from the drive had worked to clear things away for the end of the season, but if the attempts to get his attention had been exhausted, they'd still been heartfelt. Pris was definitely still asleep. Days on Willis were only a couple minutes different from Shill, but the Sasana Ranch was about 6 hours off from the capital time. Back home it wasn't even midnight yet. Here, it was already Drepna's day, the goddess of dreams and visions, the goddess of navigation. He was sure he'd been having a nice dream. Liam checked himself once and pulled open the door. Belder's uncle, Kelra, was there in the hall about to knock. Liam looked at Kelra, who looked him up and down half a second before jutting his tusks once. Come on, breakfast won't make itself. It was the most Kelra had said to him since he'd arrived. Liam followed Belder's uncle down the corridor in a daze. He was exhausted, even after a full night's sleep, but the work would go on until the drive was done. Then there would be some sort of big party for everyone, but right now, it felt like that was a year away. Everything in front of him right now was another full day of cooking, cleaning, a grueling ride out into the wilderness in the back of a chow truck, a minute or two being mooned at by cowgirls while trying to get a word in with Belle, then back, repeat for dinner before falling into bed, exhausted. Liam sighed and managed not to fall down the stairs as he pushed into the kitchen. Guradin was already working prep at the big table. They didn't even have coffee. It struck Liam then. It was clear and crisp. A vision from Drepna. The image sprung into his mind whole, vivid and complete. It was an epiphany. A dream made real in his thoughts as he pondered how Belle had sold him on the whole come and meet my family deal. A fun vacation away from Shill. I am going to kill my girlfriend. Lady Wakama settled back with her tea and pulled open her email again. The drafts of the day were sorted long ago and only one item remained. She looked at the message over the rim of her teacup, as if the text might twist and bite. It didn't, but the effect was still the same. In the absence of Her Imperial Majesty, senior representatives from the Assembly of Nobles had expressed views to the Imperial seneschal, Lady Del Real. The Empress has sent the elderly woman back with Kamaud're's flotilla along with portions of the court, but although Shy Del Real was well into her senior years, there was nothing dull about her wits. She'll likely work until she dies. It's more likely that not working would kill her. If the seneschal had been away for months, she hadn't failed to miss the commencement address for the Dornarch of Evrovi. Indeed, while the entire star system had been watching, it was Del Real who had reached out to Raylin over at the interior. Before the night was over, the event was edited into snippets and stills, before release to the courier ships, and full copies were to be erased. It wasn't a danger to the Empress, but Kamaud're's spectacle could still pose a threat. The House of Tessu wasn't just a line, but the Imperial line, and that could never afford to look weak. It was managed with care, and while there were upstarts like Princess Adwina, the majority of House Tessu, with all its distant branches, served. Princess Catria served as governess of the Sol system. Around the Imperium, there were distant cousins, but the line was carefully managed. Indara was a dear, but her rebellious streak had come perilously close to being an issue, but she'd channeled that energy, disappeared into the military, and removed herself from the public eye. Indara had been beloved as Callista's grandchild, and was Kamalesh's beloved niece. Now she was still serving the Imperium, although that service was known to few. The address had been Kamaud're's first public action in her mother's stead, and she had bungled it. If Indara hadn't cultivated the image of a spoiled playgirl, the smart money would have had the Assembly of Nobles already sniffing around her door. The uncertainty would leave the public wondering what came next, and there were already whispers in the corridors of power. Some said Kamaud're was simply not ready yet. Others expressed a belief that she was simply caught off guard, and her behaviour would pivot. Still others were foolish enough to praise her for a streak of outspoken honesty that might resolve itself into a breath of fresh air. Idiots. All of them. Kamaud're had been serving as a useful part of the Imperial family, and while not well regarded, she'd never opposed Princess Kalandri's position as the heir. Given her Drufas, the woman would probably have carried out her familial duties, and eventually accepted a duchy. In private, she would have lived the life of frivolous dissipation and excess so unfairly attributed to Indara. Most of the assembly were herd animals, and as long as their rights and prerogatives were spared, the herd would move with the tides. But there were predators among them. The assembly tended to weed out its own, but it was never a cohesive effort. The younger scions of the great houses always had their renegades, and Kamaud're had her adherents amongst those numbers. Not just the passive ones who hoped her character would mature, but women who looked on her as the opportunity for their own stars to rise. But the elder members of the assembly had expressed views to the Imperial seneschal. The Imperial seneschal had taken a day to update herself on the political landscape, probably reviewed Kalira's performance at the benediction, and made a decision. That decision had been duly delegated, and as the keeper of Her Imperial Majesty's house, that decision would be obeyed, not just by members of the court, but also by Her Majesty's children. Which brought this message to her inbox. As Kalira's secretary and retainer, she would keep it there until morning. Kalira could enjoy her evening. Tomorrow was Drepna's day, but Plutara's day would follow. Kamaud're doesn't have the temperament for the mantle of Empress, and no amount of wishful thinking will change that. The seneschal had made her choice. Letzi waited in the silence of her game pod. She'd already turned down the volume on the ground teams, who were bitching about being stuck aboard their dropships. It was all or nothing for them, and they didn't like it. It left them utterly at the mercy of the Navy with nothing to do, and if the fleet cruisers they were on got taken out, they'd be dead and out of the tournament without firing a shot. Her deployment to an empty star system, in their collective opinion, sucked. After a moment more listening to the chatter, she fully muted the ground channel, except for their commander, Imperial Hautz. Her job was to destroy their enemy, while losing as little of her forces as possible. That included the soldier girls, who could enter round 2 with a fresh team at full strength. She would have her chance to shine, but not now. With the chatter at a minimum, she set out a demarcation zone to deploy the destroyer group about halfway between the solar primary and the hyperlimit, then laid out the deployment for the fleet. There, that's the plan, she said. Congratulations. The voice was from Tickanote, her second-in-command in the other battleship. You drew a dot. The rest of her fleet was a bit more vocal, though her reputation brought her some leeway. This is the plan. Does anyone have input? If not, let's make it happen, ladies. The silence lasted a few moments. It's no use, Commander. Blowdeck, one of her cruiser captains, came back over the comm. The thick accent was Cambrian. Our armor when they hold. We're here for a battle, not to garrison. They'll hold long enough, she said firmly. If this were the real thing, Blowdeck would be right, but for the purposes of the match. Stuntra precastra pants tight, snarled Admiral Wedgie, the voice clearly one of her Akiri players. Letzi blinked. What? Don't mind Wedgie. She doesn't use her translator. Wardrobe 99 came back. She said we'll be packed in. That's the idea. Letzi pursed her lips. Everyone in the tournament wasn't just good. They were all top players. Surely they'd have looked up her stats by now, but she wasn't personally known to any of them, except the twins. They'd already talked her up to the rest of Team Ice, so most of her destroyer screen was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. To most of these women, she was an unknown quantity with good stats, and that only got you so far. Everybody, just pull up your stellar cartography screens. I want you to take a close look. I'm in a cruiser, not a science ship, grumbled the Epic No. Just look. Letzi said coolly, keeping it professional. No one ever deployed to a Class T star. They were usually barren and frequently had nothing around them. Fine, Tickanote sighed. As the fleet's second in command, it wasn't exactly resounding support, but it was enough to silence the rest of the team. Class Ts were plentiful enough in the galaxy, but they were generally incapable of supporting planets, much less supporting life. In reality, they floated through the universe, largely ignored. Galaxy Conquest modeled them too, but with no other ground teams to fight, no one wanted to go to them. Mind you, the star listed as T162/0 was cool for its type, but still featured a higher magnetic field. She waited for it as her fleet deployed. The one advantage to confront mode was that she got to deploy her units before the defenders arrived. If there was going to be any pushback from her team, it would be now. A few minutes more, and the enemy fleet, led by Burning Chrome, would appear somewhere at the hyper limit. They'd take a read on their visuals, test the waters for EM signatures, and... Oh! And then, the fun would begin. And that's a wrap except for Sector 2, under assault by Obsidian Syndrome. The judges have come back, and after going through the system, they've ruled that the system is a valid deployment. I've just never seen anything like it. Emick, the Yahtzee woman, was shaking her head. Representing the Alliance factions, she'd leaned into covering Sector 2 since the match between the Shilvanti and Nightcrew factions. Not that the other two announcers were holding back. Tom licked his lips and watched the deployment from the comfort of home. He loved his music and he loved his books, but what passed for Shilvanti television was usually 5,000 channels and nothing on. Alright, part of the resentment had been covering his wedding being plastered all over the evening news as a spectacle of human debauchery. No one has. Class T stars have zero strategic value. The Nightcrew announcer shook her head dismissively. Obsidian Syndrome has great stats as a player, but I think this is someone out of their depth. You'll never see this from a pro team, and I think we're looking at a real miscalculation here. Tom studied the bioluminescent patterns on her neck. While Lani had told him all he needed to know about Yahtzee courtship rituals, it was interesting to see a Nightcrew. The Academy had none as students, and he'd never met any on Earth or since he'd been here. Miv was watching him now and then, and he tried not to look too interested. The match was more than enough to hold his attention. I disagree, Cassell. The Shilvanti shook her head. Long dark locks swayed a bit. It was a good look, though she mugged for the camera too much. It's unconventional, but Syndrome has a reputation as a tenacious fighter. We're seeing something very different tonight, but let's not jump to conclusions. I need to take the girls out for a trophy, especially Solani. He leaned in a little closer, his arms around her and Shalea, while Miv shot him an approving smile. No chance! Tom cocked his head as the Nightcrew worked it for all it was worth. The vibrant patterns along her neck looked like glow lights at a rave as she shook her head dismissively. I'm telling you, no chance. We're talking Tier 6 ships here. Tier 6. Those fleets are rough and tumble with a lot of armor and structural bracing, but they'll take a lot of pounding right up front. I don't think it's worth the sacrifice. Burning Chrome's got a reputation for keeping a firm hand, and let's not forget she has 6 members of Clan Optic in her lineup. That's a hefty draw from a pro gaming team, and they're absolutely going to bring the pain. His fiancée didn't want to go out, which was nice, as things went. She was younger, though if you spent your working life crammed into a starship, or even worse, apparently, crammed into a bunker, then getting out and going to a party would surely be the thing to do. She was a Marine. All right, an officer, but still, she ought to want to get out a little, instead of staying home with the old married folks. His hand brushed over her mechanical arm. Her clone replacements were still growing, and whilst Alani seemed to be taking to the prosthetics fairly well, she hadn't wanted to be intimate with him before getting the new limbs. The plan to get married only days from now on Drafal's day? That was bound to circumstances, though she clearly liked the idea, But going out and being seen, maybe not so much.
Well, it's certainly going to be an interesting match, and we've updated the booking odds on Sub-Channel 14 for the audience at home.
The Yahtzee. She really did look like a kneeling centaur, though the camera usually showed her from the waist up. It wasn't a bad view.
We'll see how it falls out while the defenders come on to all 6 sectors. But first, I want to remind you our show tonight is brought to you by tonight's big sponsors. Tyrell Core of House Tyrell and Soylent Chips, now in zesty bagoon flavour. If you...
They allow betting on these matches? Tom asked. How did you do that? Were there bookie shops online? Out in town? It would be nice to get Solani out for something before the next mega trip with the Desaris. She might not want to be seen, and it was a problem that would go away as soon as the surgery... It was something to think about. Zach McClendon was probably the only man he knew who could empathize within 10,000 light years. Father Basilio was celibate. That was out. Bodine? No. Just no. Jama? Jama would probably be making comments about the Yahtzee's figure by now. Still, while Zach... No, he preferred Zachariah. While Zachariah had Jennifer, a lovely woman too, he still had one wife. He also had Brelak, but a close association with... Tom paused to count. 11 women. 12 if you included his granddaughter. Except for Jennifer, Melody, and Hannah, they were all Shovanti. Somehow he managed to stay with a single woman, but there was still a lot of women.
Sure, you can do it online. We had a betting pool going on in the bunker over your war game. A girl's got to have something to do.
Solani grinned, before slipping her arm behind his back. She looked nervously at Leia, who only shook her head and smiled.
It's too late to wager once the match starts.
Tom hugged Lani and Leia again, which earned him a delighted squeak from the former and a nudge in the ribs from the latter. Hearing the woman who'd carried him off over her shoulder squeak was more than a little fun, but it was still new. He'd been alone for so many years. Somehow finding himself surrounded by 3 very fine women and a bevy of university girls, it still felt unreal.
And now back to our match. The defending teams are deploying now.
The Shovanti woman swept a hand back at the big board, while the main screen showed the view from Orinka Stadium. Out in the center of the field, a vast holographic display divided into 6 star systems illuminated the darkness. Miniature starships moved over the crowd. Tom couldn't tell how it was done, though it was damned impressive. What are those? Drones?
He's cute when he's been old-fashioned, isn't he?
Shalea winked slightly at Lani. Miv just buried her head in her omnipad. Unreal. When he had to face marriage fundamentals again, it would feel really unreal. Zachariah McClendon had managed to hold his family together and thrive. It couldn't hurt to see if he had any pointers. At minimum, it would be something to talk about. He knew the McClendons were already on the wedding list. At least I won't be the only human stuffed in a Shovanti suit. With light coming in, so it's not like the Picard maneuver. Levi grinned. Melody gave him the smile she reserved for when her husband said things she didn't understand, which was usually when he and Riala got invested in a video game, and looked back up at the display. Orinka Stadium was packed, though she could understand why. The air overhead was divided up into 6 different solar systems in a display that put fireworks to shame, as fleets jockeyed for position. Below each star, the bowl of the stadium was sectioned off, transformed into maps of the planets, moons or space stations where platoons of defending soldiers dug in, waiting to receive their attackers. At least, under 5 of them. With no planet or installation to fight over, the expanse under Sector 2 was inky nothingness. According to Desi, the technology being used was cumbersome and expensive, something only possible with the biggest stadiums and amphitheaters. Melody was fine with that. It was an incredible view like slow-motion fireworks, but the planet side views were disturbing. She remembered the early confused reports of fighting in the streets, the fragmented news clips on TV about alien attackers, while the world tried to sort out what was happening, and demands for surrender in broken English came over the radio. Dad had ordered her and Chloe to hide in the basement for 2 days, while he made hushed calls around the county, talking to the mayor, the police chief, and worried parents everywhere. After the initial disbelief, no one knew what the aliens wanted. Was it conquest or something even worse? The demands implied everyone was now under the authority of the Imperium, but who knew what that meant? The news only talked about military bases being destroyed and communications going dark wherever the aliens landed. As acceptance started to dawn, no one knew when the monsters were due on Maple Street. Then the first images started rolling in. Women. Well, purple women with tiny tusks. And they hadn't been monsters at all. Just people, really. Purple women from outer space. Holographic or not, the planetscapes looked solid. If she zoomed in, the soldiers looked utterly realistic. Apparently there was facial mapping software, letting players use their own faces on their avatars if they wanted to. None of which meant she wanted to see fighting in the streets. It had never come to town, but what she'd seen was enough. She never wanted to see it again. The Shulvanti, though? They were an empire, like the Romans and everyone else she'd read about in history class. They liked the way they were made. Maybe everyone did. But empires meant armies. Big ones. Tonight, that meant going to the biggest blood sport she'd ever seen, and she knew if she thought about it long enough she wouldn't like it, even if it was virtual. But it was a game. A tournament during Nefrovi. The Shulvanti Super Bowl. The alliteration made her smile and look at the rest of her party. Most were chewing happily on their snacks, and the Bagoon puffs were kind of Moorish, sort of like a spicy banana. She spotted Vadim looking away. They caught each other's eye, and he shrugged. She offered him a rueful smile. At least she wasn't the only person who wasn't a gamer. And no matter how realistic, it was a game. Levi and Riala were having a great time. The other girls were cheering as the teams committed. Dropships launched, and fleets started to move in a slow ballet overhead. Bouquets outside had been jammed while professional esports teams had garish displays, complete with showboys. The volume of cheering would have been deafening, if not for the earpods which brought that down to background noise. Each seat had disposable buzz that drowned out the clamour, while letting you tune into the channel of your choice. Every sector had its 2 teams. Then there were the commentary channels run by the professional teams, channels by the bookies, channels for the announcers, even channels run by the sponsors. She dialed in on Sector 2 and pulled up the channel for Letzi and her team. Obsidian Syndrome, Imperial. But they were keeping radio silent. She had no idea what Levi was trying to say about the maneuver, but she'd not been asleep in science class either. No one had faster-than-light information, which meant that the ships jumping in had a chance to spot anyone who was really visible, giving off EM signatures, changes in velocity that red or blue shifted them, or just doing something to stand out. While they were there on the edge of the hyperlimit around each star, it gave the team dropping into the star system the upper hand. Shulvanti's ships only travelled at a small fraction of the speed of light, so everyone would see each other before they were into an accurate firing range. While the benefits disappeared soon enough, it gave the advancing fleet a chance to shift around to their best advantage. But Letzi's fleet was dark. Well, sort of dark. Not literally dark, considering. Over on the betting channel, people were going crazy. She changed channels. Burning Chrome and her team was a different story. Emmy Segalin bit her lip and looked at the system display. As fleet commander, she was burning Chrome to the rest of her team, and it was a good team too. Her players adopted for a heavy point spread of consortium cruisers. They were fast and lean ships, faster than Imperial cruisers and with a greater throw range to their weaponry at Tier 6. Their weapons cycled faster than Imperial ships too, and had better targeting systems, which made her capable of holding back to lay down fire while dancing just out of range. Their armor was shit, but that wasn't the point. Given a chance to keep the range, she could deal with the Imperial fleet. Her enemy had chosen a blank system around a T-class star, which was pissing off her ground team, but who cared? It was an empty space. Except the enemy wasn't there. Well, that wasn't entirely true. After jumping in, sensors on some of her ships picked up 4 mass signatures, moving halfway between the star and the hyperlimit. If Syndrome's fleet was split into 4, she could hunt them down and kill them in detail. The chatter was already excited on her fleet comm, with everyone expecting an easy win.
Right, everyone keep quiet and let's do this by the numbers. All units stay together. Let's firm up those readings.
Reining in her team wasn't that hard. Sure, everyone wanted to race off, but they got it, especially her pro players. There was looking good, and then there was... The game was sped up to 10 times speed, which allowed the deploying team to move in. It was boring for everyone, players and the audience both, to watch nothing happening, but light speed was a constant, and her fleet would be noticed by the nearest mass signature right about... The game snapped into 3 times speed as the enemy detected her, which was fine. It wouldn't drop into normal speed until the first shots were fired. She waited. Seconds later, the mass signature pulled violently in towards the stellar primary, on course to swing around to the far side. She bit her lip again, and waited. Minutes passed, and the other 3 mass signatures did the same. Destroyers. They had to be. But they were all destroyers. Cruisers and battleships couldn't pull that kind of velocity change. If any of those mass signatures had been the enemy fleet, the target... Optics came in. 4 destroyers, which wasn't all of them, but the Imperial team only had 7. As she watched, they all arced toward the star, aiming to pass around it to the far side.
Bad luck for them,
she grinned happily. Sure, it was pure bad luck to come in on the opposite side of the system from the enemy, but that was about it. The star was tiny, and so was the cone of space the sensors couldn't see. It didn't matter. Right now, the enemy destroyers were racing in to notify Syndrome's fleet, but on the arc they were travelling, they had to be close to the star, not far out on the opposite end of the hyperlimit. That wouldn't have been a bad plan. If Syndrome had planted her fleet just at the edge of the system, there was a chance. The odds were sucky, but definitely not impossible, that her fleet might have popped into normal space within Imperial firing range. The armor and integrity on Tier 6 Consortium ships was awful, and the Imperials would have blown her fleet to the deeps. But that hadn't happened. If the destroyers were on course for a rendezvous, that meant the Imp team was maybe 10 or 20% away from the star. She hadn't seen them, and it was a tiny star too, which meant the Imp fleet was moving at a 0 velocity. Sitting targets.
Listen up! Take the fleet on a 009 Mark 0 course after the destroyer I'm marking as target 1, and keep on course. Destroyers, stay put and everyone match speed with my battleship.
She marked a bubble of space about 15% away from the star on the other side. It wasn't a big bubble.
They're in here. We should acquire them by Meridian 90. Hold fire and firm up the targets until we hit marker 75, then fire a full spread of lasers and kinetics before executing random changes to course and speed.
The lasers would be iffy, but the kinetics against stationary targets? Most of the kinetics would miss, but any that didn't would shatter their targets.
The party is on, people! Let's barbecue those bitches!
Even her ground team cheered. Kamaud're stared at her desk Omni as yet another missive of support popped into existence. Her personal inbox was programmed to shunt aside business messages, and even the lower tiers of nobility. Those went to her secretary for sorting, and the adorable little fellow sorted out the treasure from the trash. Business that was suitable to the Northern Palace was routed to the appropriate minions, while items requiring her personal input were forwarded for her attention. Not that one could fault the poor man.
How could one know one's mind when faced with such a deluge? Misses from women her age? Noble women who would one day inherit their mother's estates? Then there were those with a surfeit of money, if not title, women who hungered for positions of power or prestige. So often it happened that noble families produced women with more ambition than ability. Women who clung to the notion that they deserve more. She has seen so many during her time with the Interior. Women who never strove to service, and who thought their name was enough. They never served their houses, never stood through the desperate, tiresome trials of the Interior, or interminable affairs of state, tore through small talk and pleasantries so banal that it dulled the mind. They had no inkling of what one suffered as a princess. Not that they couldn't be fun. Several even numbered as one's personal favourites, while others sought to curry her attentions. Her mother and grandmother had remade the Interior and the court as they desired. Instead of lavishing offices and honours on the upper ranks of the aristocracy, women were made to vie for positions with gifts to the Imperium. Public works and acts of charity, displays of wealth that could stagger a duchess or beggar a baroness now ranked tusk to tusk with those who showed personal distinction. While honours and accolades still flowed, the balance of power had tipped firmly into her mother's hands. If one wanted a position that earned great wealth, one could achieve it, at the cost of great wealth. Her mother and grandmother had forced the nobility to heel by taking advantage of their pride. As the hoi polloi would say, they had taken the nobility by the tits and never let go. The expectation was to perform, just as it had always been, but her mother had given it a glamour that portrayed service as something fashionable. That was certainly what she had done, but not everyone embraced that point of view. It was so parochial and tedious, but that didn't mean it couldn't be entertaining. One merely had to dangle the bait of a word or gesture, then cast one's net. Now, once, one would once have been pleased, perhaps even charmed to receive such attentions. But how? How could one ignore the fawning undertones after the dawn address? It was all the fault of her handlers. Where were they when her initial speech was torn to shreds by the censors? Dullards! If she'd had to deliver an impromptu address to the masses, it was their fault. As for the drink... Tarvey!
Yes, your highness?
The tremulous voice wafted up from the floorboards where the woman knelt.
How can this wretch be of service?
Kamaud're kicked her desk and was rewarded with a squeak. There's not enough tremble in your voice, you wretched little reeks! How? Did I not allow you to keep your job? Would one rather wish to sleep on the streets?
No, please!
The woman squealed piteously. It wasn't a good squeal. It lacked a certain shrill quality, but the day was getting late, and one had other things to worry about. She glared at the offending message on her desk omni. Truth be told, that was the real offence.
If I could only have something to eat. It's been over a day, your...
Tarvey whimpered. Enough! One isn't going to indulge your hobbies! Kamaud're stood imperiously, which allowed her a view of Tarvey's feet. As an Ottoman, the lackey was sorely lacking. Still, one could be merciful, and she sniffed, fortifying herself for the trying task of explaining. Has one not been merciful enough? Has one not allowed you to retain your job and given you a full supply closet to sleep in? Without us, you would have nothing.
It's next to the reactor, your highness.
So what? You have heat. So what? You have heat. Enough of this. You're a tiresome footrest. Kamaud're threw her hands into the air, pointing at her screen accusingly. I have an outing to plan, a speech to write, and now this! This! Plutara's Day. The speech for the day arc of Hivovi, and the Assembly of Nobles has requested it be given. By one's sister. One is supposed to step aside and merely attend in the backdrop, overshadowed by a mere slip of a girl. Kamaud're nearly screamed at the offending message. How dare they? Seneschal or no, the offence to one's dignity was beyond measure. This is an intolerable pretense. How is one to recover one's reputation without being given the chance?
I have an idea.
Oh, you have an idea? That's all one wants after your last idea, you miserable wretch. One has an idea. To promote you from a footstool to a wall hanging. The effrontery of it all. The notion that an Imperial princess needed the help of such a wretched toady. Though she had no ideas of her own. In their mother's absence, the seneschal spoke with her voice. To flout her decisions without good cause at this juncture would be unwise. Still, Kamaud're huffed. Speak, bitch!
Well, it's just that if she looked worse than you, people might forget about the first speech. You could even see the drinks were her fault, your Royal Highness.
How? One could do something so dastardly as to sabotage one's sister?
Well, but one could?
Indeed? You say it could be done?
I nearly think I did.
Then you will be right to do so. Perhaps. Kamaud're waved a hand, peremptorily. Kamaud're waved a hand, peremptorily, then realized it was a wasted effort. Now, take yourself off the floor and explain. The tiny star was still a star, and it loomed on her screens as burning chrome watched the range fall. They were on course to chase after the target marked as Destroyer 1. The targets marked 2, 3, and 4 were still weaving around the star hesitantly. Noobs. Well, not noobs. No one in the tournament was a noob, but anyone could hesitate when they saw the game was already over. They probably couldn't decide if they were going to stick it out with their fleet or make a run for it. Some people just wanted to spit in your eye to deny you the kill points. Her fleet had kept together. They were coming up on the 135 arc from the far side of the sun. Just a few more minutes and... the game abruptly snapped into normal speed. Seconds later, her board flicked, as 4 of her heavy cruisers suddenly contorted into tumbling wreckage, while another flared into a second star as its reactors failed. Confused shouts echoed across her board as another of her ships died. I'm taking fire! Another ship flared out of existence as damage reports walked along her wall of battle. It was precision fire. A quarter of her fleet was gone and the enemy wasn't even showing on scanners. Where are they? I have no target! She had just enough time to register lasers slicing through her port armor before her pod went dark, cutting her off from her fleet. She was only able to watch as the carnage unfolded. She was dead. It was impossible. The only place they could be was... inside the star, Tom said happily. The consortium girls never saw it coming. I saw it, but I still don't believe it. Solani shook her head. You could never do that in real life. Well, you can, but not for long. That's a Class T star. Even for brown dwarfs, that's cool. Tom gave his befuddled fiancée a squeeze. But inside? Miva set her omnipad aside when the match had started, and cocked her head as the results came in. Their ship should have been obliterated. I've had hotter cups of coffee than the corona of that star. Why doesn't that surprise me? Shalea said dryly, but she purred as he hugged her close. What I mean is that, even down deep? Tom gestured with the remote as he changed to the announcer's channel. It was eating away their heat shielding, but they could have sat there for a day or so. That's what gave the announcers fits while the moderators checked, Solani nodded. Class T stars aren't even considered part of the main sequence, and they never have planets. That's why everyone ignores them. You might as well sit in empty space. Shalea stroked along his leg, but gestured at the screen. But they couldn't just be invisible to the other team? Near enough, or at least the game thought so. The corona hit their image while the star's magnetic signature masked their fleet. You couldn't garrison a star system that way, but just for a match? It works! Solani snuck away the remote control and flicked to the ground feed for Sector 6, where the camera showed a marine assault team was planting breaching charges. Now that's some real action. The other battles were raging. Final scores wouldn't come out until tomorrow, but the battle for Sector 2 was already over. Tom beamed as he rummaged for his popcorn. The sweeping vistas of space lent dignity to the battles overhead, but the simulated flights on the ground brought back ugly memories. They didn't matter right now. He took the win for what it was. There was always the battle tomorrow.